Well, hello everyone. Michele Molitor here with Nectar Consulting. I hope you all have had a fantastic month since the last time I saw you. Here we are again for another special event of Wonder Woman Unite. And this month we have a very amazing guest, one of my dear friends and colleagues, Miss Tovi Scruggs-Hussein. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Absolutely, and so
Okay,
glad to be
good, because
here.
I was worried about that. I like to tell on myself, folks. Anyway, I'm super excited that she's here. She's recently married, sort of, so that's why. So for those of you who are new to Wonder Woman Unite, I created this group, gosh, almost 3 years ago now, and we are an amazing collection of women from all over the world. And the reason I host a show every month is to create a safe space for women to show up, to listen, to get amazing advice and wisdom and insights from some of the brilliant women that have come across my path over the years. And we post this live or sometimes pre-recorded, as of today. We post this every third Friday of the month at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, 12:30 Eastern, and 5:30 UK time. So you can always find it on my Michele Molitor YouTube channel or on my website, Nectar Consulting. Be sure to tune in and check out all the other previous episodes of Wonder Woman Unite! Exclamation point. And be sure, if you haven't already, to go out to our Facebook page and our Facebook group. And there are several Wonder Woman Unite groups, go figure, but ours has the exclamation point on it. So be sure to check that out and join the conversation. So without further ado, today I'm going to be talking with Tovi about cultivating courage consciousness. And Tovi is an amazing, amazing woman. I love her dearly. She has been an educator for over 25 years. She's an award-winning urban high school principal. She has led so much healing and transformation and culture and climate change throughout her many years of work in education, and has now taken on the amazing and brilliant work of Brené Brown in her Dare to Lead program. Tovi was one of the, 30-something women in Brené Brown's first cohort of training Dare to Lead facilitators, and she is now bringing this work here to the San Francisco Bay Area and beyond. And I'll have some more information for you about her upcoming workshops. But a little bit more about Tovi. Her work is all about equity and integrated self-mastery, teaching trauma-informed leadership and emotional literacy development for educators and leaders. And she has taught me so much and shared so much with me and the work that we've done together in various different ways. And so I'm really excited to have you here. So welcome, Ms. Tovi.
Thank you so much. It is really an honor to be here, and please know that it's completely mutual. What I've learned from you and some of the foundational skills that you gave me while I was still a principal to go out and do this work into the world are still with me today. And so I'm just so grateful that we're still connected and that there's a mutuality in our friendship and our colleagueship. So thank you.
Yes, yes. Well, absolutely. So Tovi, tell us more. Well, before I dive wholeheartedly into the Dare to Lead and cultivating courage consciousness, tell us just a little bit about your background, because you have your own interesting story that brings you to this work, don't you?
Absolutely. And, you know, my story is really, it overlaps in so many ways, as so many of our journeys and our stories do. I really got on a healing path for myself in my early adult years, like 19, 20 years old, having lost my mother to AIDS when I was 14 years old, which is really traumatic for me, and got me thinking about other aspects of self and how to heal. And I was fortunate enough to meet some older women that referred to themselves as African medicine women, that really took me under their belt and taught me an empowerment model of healing. And this empowerment model really worked as a framework that bled over into my leadership, bled over into my teaching, and into my own personal life in terms of we can heal ourselves. Everything we need is within us. Of course, we work with coaches and other healers or therapists, whatever the case is, to help us on that journey and sort of help to midwife it. But it's really in us and up to us to have a courage consciousness, to go forth in the depths of ourselves, to bring out our own healing. And so I started meditating when, it wasn't necessarily the in thing to do, in my early 20s, which was definitely the mid 1990s. And so I've been doing a lot of that work as well and cultivating emotional intelligence. And I started working with students when I was in my early 20s and started meditating with them and helping them around empowerment. And so I just really started to see how empowered leadership was really a part of my philosophy and who I am. And while it started off with kids, it started going into adult capacity building as well. And I started seeing the connections about how we as adults need to work on ourselves in order to better serve others and particularly the children. And I always say that working with kids is truly the most sacred work there is.
Yes.
And so we have to come at it more wholehearted, more whole, more in touch with ourselves in order to bring that to them. So, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I absolutely agree with you. I originally met Tovi when I was doing work in education through the California Gear Up program, and have always been amazed at the courage it takes to be a teacher and an educator. It's hard work, and you're dealing with all the unknowns of all those beautiful souls in your classrooms and the issues and the challenges and the trauma that they bring that they can't necessarily voice. And so creating that safe space and that peaceful container for them to be able to show up fully is absolutely instrumental. And you've been such a beautiful role model for that. So thank you for all your work there. And so you've been an educator for a long time, even though you look like you're like 20, girl, please. and now you've taken on this amazing work from Brené Brown. So just for our listeners who aren't maybe necessarily familiar with Brené Brown's work, can you tell us a little bit more about that and how you got involved with it?
Wow, I've been a virtual student of Brene since she came out with her first books, and starting with The Gifts of Imperfection, and just really fell in love with how she was approaching our own development, but also our leadership development, and really bringing emotional intelligence into the public sector in so many ways. And I just jumped at it was a fluke how I even found out about the training. I was looking at something else on her website after reading Dare to Lead, which is it is her latest book, and just really ended up
6 now or something.
6, and she'll have another one coming out in 2020. So she challenges herself to write a book a year, basically.
Yeah.
And, so she's really bringing in the interpersonal dynamics into the workplace in ways that make sense for people to do their own personal work, but yet how does that also translate into our team dynamics and having a non-toxic workplace and having a productive workplace. So she's taking a lot of I would think the work of like Lencioni and Maxwell to a different level in a lot of ways. And so this Dare to Lead program is really around brave work, tough conversations, and whole hearts in the workplace. And so how can we be better leaders? How can we be better team players? And then doing this work with your team it really translates into better team building skills as well, and teams really growing together and doing this work.
Yeah, and it's hard work to get a team to come together fluidly. What I love so much about Brené Brown's work is that it's all based in data. She's a researcher and a storyteller, right? So all of her work is around researching the basis of courage, of vulnerability, of shame, and empathy, right? Understanding these root emotions of who we are as human beings and how those show up in all of us. I'm sorry, but nobody gets away from shame. We all have something in our trunk that creates some sense of shame for us. And so she's done this deep dive of research into these topics and has several TED Talks around them. She's the first person to have a recorded talk on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, The Path to Courage, I highly recommend it. It's a little over an hour long. And she brings all this research and information into her books, and Dare to Lead, which is her latest, as Tovi said, is kind of the culmination of her 20 years of research in this arena. And I've had the joy and the pleasure of being one of Tovi's first students on this material after she was one of Brené Brown's first students for her Brené Brown's first cohort at the beginning of this year. And so when Tovi tapped me to say, "Hey, come be in my first workshop," I was like, yes. So it was just the perfect thing that I needed. And really enjoyed going through the material. It's a way to deep dive into the book, if you will, and to try it on and get it more in your bones, how to be more vassal with this information and then be able to utilize it. I already have a couple of clients I have in mind for it. So tell us a little bit more about the work that you're teaching, the Dare to Lead work that you're teaching in these workshops that you've got coming up, Tovi, and how it can really positively impact a team. So I can tell you about my experience, but I want to hear more about yours.
Great, thank you. It's really, at the end of the day, it's really about cultivating more courage through connection to self, and creating that sense of self-awareness so that you are able to take that and to lead others either personally or professionally. And I don't see leadership as something we only do out there. I see leadership as something we be in our homes. Leadership is something we be in our lives. And one of Brené's best quotes is, "Who we are is how we lead." And so I really take that to heart in terms of leading anything. And so the book really does culminate with her 20 years of research and looking at how we armor up. What are the ways that we guard ourselves and protect ourselves from being connected and vulnerable in the workplace and in our personal lives? And so how can we start to, in a sense, overcome that armor and start to peel that armor away so that we're able to live more closely connected to our values, have a greater sense of self, living from a place of integrity where we're actually aligned to our values and acting in those ways. Another Brene gem is integrity is choosing courage over comfort. Yes. So how do we stand strong to choose courage over comfort? How do we embody that courage consciousness and that mindset to really bring this out into the world? Honestly, I think it's all about resilience in so many ways: our emotional resilience, our spiritual resilience, our workplace resilience. And I love that the program culminates with a focus on us really looking at resilience and how we're in the reckoning process. Then we go through the rumble, and then we come out with this revolution, sort of this rebirth, these ahas, making sense of so much of ourselves so that we can go out and be better leaders. In the workshop, we look at practicing feedback and really seeing how clear is kind and unclear is unkind. So
My
how can we
favorite
do
quote.
that? Isn't that the best?
It's so clear.
And Brene, it's so clear. And Brene talks about how we protect ourselves from giving someone what we call hard feedback. It's making the person who's giving the feedback more uncomfortable, not the person who's receiving it. If they can't understand the feedback we've given, it's not helpful. It is
Right.
unclear. It is unkind. They cannot make a course correction on unclear feedback. When we're
Exactly.
able to give that clear feedback, but giving that clear feedback relies on us having the courage consciousness to show up fully, be strong enough in ourselves to know that we are giving difficult feedback laced with compassion, laced with kindness, laced with the truth. An actionable skill that allows someone to course correct. And once we get over that sense of discomfort, then we're able to stand better as who we are as leaders. And that,
Absolutely.
oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, that's okay.
And that discomfort is linked. It's
Yeah,
linked to our
I can think
vulnerability.
back to my corporate days and then even in the consulting work that I've done over the years. And I could see where it would have been so much more effective if somebody had given me that clear, kind feedback versus the back channeling and the backstabbing and all of that happens. And it's so rampant in corporate cultures and organizations because honestly, I don't know that we're taught how to have really clear, direct, compassionate conversations. Of course, this all goes back to, God bless them, our parents, and how we were raised and how we were taught to communicate by our family, our friends, our circles of influence as we're growing up. And I love my family dearly, but if you ask someone, how's everything going? Oh, it's fine. It's fine.
Right.
There was never that real, well, no, it's not quite. Let's have a chat, right? It was either fine or it was really bad, right? There was no real in between. And so I love this work so much because it gives people those tools and how to look inside themselves and then be able to communicate more clearly. One of my favorite quotes from this work is, leaders must either invest a reasonable amount of time attending to fears and feelings or squander an unreasonable amount of time trying to manage ineffective and unproductive behavior. How many of us have had to deal with unproductive behavior, right? People on their team and spinning in circles.
Yeah. And on top of that, is you're naming not just that quote, but the tools, unpacking the anatomy of trust. Like when we hear the word trust and how much trust is broken in the workplace and broken in our professional lives, I love that Brene encapsulates trust as 7 distinct elements that she refers to as the anatomy of trust. So how do we unpack that, and what tools do we start to name that help us be more trustworthy? And the trustworthiness is really about us being trustworthy with ourselves first, so that we can be trustworthy with others. If we can't trust ourselves, then we cannot trust others, nor can we be trustworthy. And the tools and behaviors that are specifically named around how we might armor up. There's 6 specific ways that we tend to armor up, and how do we start to chisel away at that armor so that that's not part of who we are, because we cannot get to courage without rumbling with our own vulnerability. And that too is a Brené Brown quote.
Yeah.
So important that those soft skills and those emotions are brought to the forefront so that we can do the other things. And these soft skills are not soft. If they were soft, they wouldn't be in the way.
Right. So you brought up that word vulnerability, the V word, right? And most people hear that and go, I don't want to be vulnerable. Why would I want to be vulnerable? That sounds horrible, right? So tell us a little bit more about how Brene defines vulnerability and what that actually means.
I love her definition of it, and it makes so much sense because so often we think in the workplace when we're being vulnerable that we're sharing a lot and we're pouring out our heart. And the bottom line is you can't overshare and you can't pour out your heart to people who can't handle that, and people who are not trusting to have that information. And so she really talks about being vulnerable from a place of taking risk and not being certain of what the outcome will be. And she likens it a lot to, say, falling in love. You're being your authentic self, you're taking a risk on this relationship, but you really don't know what the outcome will be. You want it to be something grandiose, you want it to be something beautiful, but there is no guarantee. And that is the highest form of vulnerability, when you're putting your own sense of emotional safety at risk in some way. And you're not doing this, without wise risk taking. Let's be clear. There's wisdom in it, but there's still a sense of risk that's allowing for heartbreak. There's a sense of risk that's allowing for disappointment.
Yeah.
And so how are we still living whole, living full, and taking those risks and not knowing what's going to happen?
So
That's vulnerability.
So how do we apply vulnerability in the workplace, Tovi? Because that, we're not all falling in love at work, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Applying it in the workplace really means living according to your values, not being quiet about the hard things that we need to be saying to each other. Being vulnerable is really speaking your truth at work, be it with feedback, be it with your messaging. Being vulnerable is trying something new. Being daring enough to try something new with your team, to try something new with a product, with a marketing plan, but following your heart in a way, again, where there's wisdom there, but you're not guaranteed of what the result's going to be. So how can you be vulnerable? But that vulnerability is also connected to our hearts and connected to that inner knowingness, where generally, if we're vulnerable, the outcomes are more often than not that of success. Yet at the same time, we know if we're going to be vulnerable, if we're going to be innovative, if we're going to be a leader, there are going to be times when we're going to fail. And that's where the resilience piece comes in, because it's not about not failing. It's about, okay, if you do fail, when you will fail, how will you get up? How will you be in that process? What's the story you're going to tell yourself around that? Are you going to fall back into your cave of all of your shame behaviors? Are you going to fall back in and just armor right back up? No, because that doesn't teach anybody around you anything. You absolutely must learn how to reckon with a level of failure so that you can have this revolution. You can have this new story and have this wisdom and experience under your belt. And that's what inspires others. One of the things that Brene found in her research was that the number one thing that blocked leaders from being more vulnerable and trusting with their teams was not asking for help. Not enough people in the workplace ask for help. They see it as a sign of weakness or not knowing enough. And asking for help is really about getting clear. Asking for help is really about improving the efficacy of the collective effort.
Yeah. What I love in that is, vulnerability is that open heart space. And in that open heart space is creativity, right? As she talks about, vulnerability is actually an act of courage, because it takes courage to share your ideas, to share your thoughts, to share your truth inside of an organization, particularly if it's toxic, right? But without that courage, without that vulnerability, there can be no creativity. It is very armored, and then it's not the fullness that it could be when we put our shields down, right, and allow ourselves to shine fully. It's such a powerful understanding and lesson, and it took me many, many, many years to learn how to not hide behind my shame and my failures, Um, but when I was able to do that, when I was able to let go of the emotional charge around the what happened and just was like, this is what's so, and now I've learned from it and I've moved on. It's like, oh, I felt so much more empowered and stronger and capable. It was like, okay, yeah, that happened. Pick yourself up, get up and get over it and move forward. But it's taking that wisdom and applying it moving forward. You know, I always tell clients that failure is just how we learn. There's nothing wrong with it. It's painful sometimes, but it's just how we learn. Okay, don't do that. Right? Try it a different way and see what happens. Right? And so when you're able to do that, when you're able to bring that courage to your teams, to your organizations, it can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. And I love the way that you're able to articulate it, in that I feel like, you know, as seasoned as you are and all the work that you've done on yourself and out into the world, here you are having had the experience of the workshop, having read parts of the book and able to articulate it in some other kinds of ways and pull on the language of the armor and learn some other skills and give that courage consciousness a life.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the most powerful pieces I found in the book and going through the material was when she was talking about shame shields. Right. So tell us a little more about shame shields and how those tend to show up in an organization.
Well, shame shields are really harmful and detrimental because they cause us to hide. They cause us to lie. They cause us to have low self-esteem and low self-worth. And they cause us to tell stories to ourselves that aren't true. And so when those types of behaviors show up at work, then we're not being our full selves at work. We're not offering our best ideas. We're not operating in a place of flow. Like you named, we're not being as creative as we can be. Because we're lying to our coworkers, we're hiding what we don't know because we're afraid to ask. So all of this is rooted in shame in some way. And generally it stems from something that wasn't even shaming in our professional career. It goes back to something that was shaming early on in life.
Yeah.
And oftentimes too, when we are operating from a place of shame, if we're someone's supervisor or we're the CEO or we're the boss, we will use shame as a strategy. And shame is one of the worst strategies we can ever use to supervise others. There's no respect there. There's no trust there. There's no heart there.
Yeah.
And we are not going to get the best from our people if we are creating a space where shame is operating and using that as our supervisory model.
Yeah. Brene found through her research that there are three different kinds of shame shields. There's shaming where you hide out, right? There's shaming where then you overdo for others. And the worst one, the most toxic one I found is when you use shame as kind of an attack mode. So when you hit someone's button about something, that is their shame button, instead of them taking responsibility for it, or like, wow, okay, that's a difficult thing for me to talk about, they come at you with shame and try to put it on you instead of making you wrong, versus it's actually their stuff, right? And
exactly. But you're giving away all the secret sauce, Michele.
Well, it was a powerful lesson for me because I was kind of in the middle of something, and I was like, oh, that's what's going on. Okay, I see that now. So it was very eye-opening. Very, very eye-opening. But yeah, the book is full of really powerful learning and information and exercises for folks to go through. One of my other favorite exercises and I'd love for you to kind of walk folks through it just at a high level, is just the braving trust, the acronym. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. The Braving Trust acronym has a lot to do with our boundaries. I'm going to jump around a little bit because I'm like skipping the R, but
The R is reliability.
thank you, reliability and accountability, integrity. I love the V for vault and having that sense of confidentiality. And I already said the I around integrity. Tell me the N.
Non-judgment.
Non-judgment. And then, of course, there's also generosity. And I love that it ends on this high note of generosity. So the 7 elements of trust spell out braving. And Brene takes us through this not only in her book, but also she has a video on the anatomy of trust on YouTube, and she speaks to it in her Call to Courage Netflix special, which I highly encourage everyone to read. But again, these 7 elements of trust are linked to how are we treating ourselves with our own boundaries, our own reliability, our own accountability. All those 7 areas, how are we being that with self first so that we can be that with others? And that trust is not this one huge conceptual word. These 7 elements play together, and trust is built in small efforts, small acts, small behaviors over time. I just did a Braving Trust workshop with a school district here in the Bay Area, and worked with 3 teams and took them through the whole anatomy and had the teams dive in. It was beautiful to work with 3 different teams at the same time.
Yeah.
And they talked about having conversations that they had never had before and wanted to have. And when they were able to frame braving in terms of these 7 distinct elements, they were able to more clearly articulate for each other what areas where trust had been broken. What areas did they need to operationalize more fully in their team to have that area of trust be more present? And so it really breaks it down to where you can pinpoint, oh, the vault piece is missing for us. We're not holding each other's information with confidentiality. We're not treating each other respectfully by holding this information. We're not being generous with each other. And generosity, meaning generosity of our mindset, generosity of giving someone the benefit of the doubt, which is really in a lot of ways just being loving. Okay, we're not setting boundaries. So a lot of the people were communicating with their supervisors, you haven't given me boundaries around this area, which is why I'm not performing as well as I could be. But now that you're naming this, I can see how I can improve. They were able to operationalize trust and trust building, and that's huge.
Wow.
That is absolutely huge. So that they can literally, because we know we can change a behavior. When it's specific and you're given clear feedback around it, that's a shift that you can make when you're willing to make it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I love that you were able to do that with the teams, because in all my years of work, trust is one of those fundamental things that is, as you said, it builds incrementally, but once it's broken, it's hard to regain, right? And I've seen it particularly in the 11 years of work that I did with Gear Up, where there was a lot of mistrust in the schools that I had the opportunity to work in. And it's heartbreaking because you've got this collection of people who are here all to do really good work to serve their children. And when there's that fighting, that the subtext that's happening, the back channeling that's happening, it just breaks down the trust. It breaks down the ability to work effectively and productively together. And so having this methodology, having this structure for teams of all kinds, not just for educators, but all kinds of teams to be able to walk through and have open, honest conversations in a safe container is really, really powerful. You know, as we went through this braving inventory, in the workshop that I participated in, I really wanted to add an S. I wanted to be bravings, even though I know that's not work. But for me, the S is really about that safety, creating that psychological safety, particularly as a leader, is imperative in order to have your team feel like they can step up and in fully and say what there is to say. Just this week, I co-facilitated a 2-day retreat of executives, very powerful executives. And this work will be very handy as we move forward because, it was very clear to me that there's some gaps there. And, you know, some folks know this, and if you don't, I'm going to remind you that, you know, a culture of any organization starts from the head down. And so if you have an executive team that doesn't have a healthy culture, then you're going to have an organization that doesn't have a healthy culture. And so this process is really powerful to help bring people together so that it can then ripple down throughout an entire organization. And can you imagine what a whole organization would look like that was operating from a place of trust, from vulnerability, from courage? You know, that gives me chills when I think about that. Like that's what we need more and more of these days. So Tovi, tell us more about the workshops that you're going to be leading here in the Bay Area, and what folks can expect from them, what they'll walk away with.
So folks will definitely walk away with the tools around trust building for themselves, for their families, for their workplace. They'll definitely walk away with greater emotional intelligence and greater self-awareness. They'll walk away with some of the stories that they're telling themselves and how to reframe those stories, and actually walk away with a reframing. They'll start to identify ways that they armor up at work and are able to link those to where they are with their own values. And they'll start to look at what new behaviors they can use to disarmor, to shed that armor so that they can become more vulnerable from a place of strength, and really start to see that who they are is how they lead. They'll definitely leave with some tools that they're able to use in their own life with their teams that they may be leading or even a part of at their workplace. And they'll lead with great skills in how to provide better feedback. And again, that's personally and professionally as well. So there's a lot of skills in this 2-day intensive and tools that we'll be building. We're doing a 2-day intensive July 17th and 18th in Oakland, and we're currently registering for that. And I also want to add that I really like having the workshops be more intimate and smaller so people get the space and attention that they need. So we're looking at between 20 to 30 people for the Oakland gathering, and the same in Silicon Valley. That will be July 22nd and 23rd. We'll be doing an offering there as well. That will be on Eventbrite very soon, but the Oakland one is currently on Eventbrite, and there's reduced pricing early bird up until July 5th.
Fabulous. And we'll have those links in the show notes for you all. For those of you who are interested in going through this training with Tovi, I highly recommend it. She's an amazing teacher and facilitator, and creates such a beautiful space for learning to happen. So I'm excited for all of you who decide to say yes. I have a whole bunch of folks that I want to send it to myself so they know about it. So tell us, Tovi, about how these shields show up at work. How do people armor up at work, and what does that typically look like, so people can start to notice that in their workplace and see what's going on there?
Some of the shields really show up first. We start to feel them in our bodies. A lot of the time, there could be a tightening or a tenseness that could happen in our chest. So we explore some ways about how are we having greater embodiment of experiencing the shields. I don't really want to name the shields here, though, because I want to keep people intrigued.
Give us one. Come on, give us one.
Well, we know that one shield is definitely a shield of shame, and we have unpacked that a bit. Okay, there's definitely a fear shield as well. So some of these shields show up as emotions. Okay, so that's important. What was your favorite shield?
Gosh, that's a good question. Favorites. For me, I know that when I get triggered in a particular way, my shield that goes up tends to be I retreat. And then I tend to overdo. Is everything okay? Because I feel it really distinctly in my body. And so I've learned that I have to take a step back and breathe and reground and like, okay, what's really going on here for me? And then how do I step back into the arena? That makes sure that we can keep moving things forward in a good way and we don't get stuck. It was interesting, and the reason why I was really excited to do this work with you. Last year, there was something that happened in a project that I was working on, and I got really triggered. Like, it was a very old corporate trigger from about 20 years ago that I thought I had handled.
That was powerful.
Clearly I had not. And it was so visceral. I almost had a panic attack. It was that visceral. And I like, okay, and I got my own little coach in my head, right? I'm trying to talk myself down out of the tree, like, okay, it's all good, right? and I eventually did. It took me about a day to kind of get myself back into a good place. But I was just like, wow, okay. And I say this just from not trying to toot a horn or anything, but I've spent a lot of time doing work on myself. Spent a whole boatload of time, nearly 20 years. And so I was quite shocked at how powerful that nerve got hit in me. And it took a little bit of time for me to kind of come back around and like, okay, right? So for someone like myself who's done a lot of work, I know there's, a bazillion people out there who have done work on themselves or who haven't, and we all have those triggers. We're covered in buttons, in case you didn't know, right? You never know when one's going to get pushed. And so, you just have to be mindful and notice when you get one of those triggers, one of those buttons get pushed, like, how do you want to be with it and how can you handle it differently next time?
And so that was part of my point too that I was making, and just that, you've done over 20 years of work on yourself. I've done over 20 years of work on myself, but we don't stop doing the work because we continue to see how there are layers to our own healing, layers to our own awareness that continue to make us better.
Yeah.
Not just personally, but professionally. And I don't think it's any accident that, you've got this wonderful, robust contract that you've started with this executive leadership team and leading into this retreat. And you were able to identify this piece that was acting as a form of armor almost unconsciously, that got brought to the surface and in a sense really healed. And I think that is so powerful because you're embarking on something huge and new and wonderful. I'd like to call it kind of next level. And taking yourself there so that you can take other people there is critical. So I see the real synergy there and you having that aha and that healing moment, because that's not something you need to carry with you into this new experience
Absolutely.
of who you're leading and how you're leading. And so you're going to be even that much more powerful. So I hope they're super duper ready. And so they must be ready. And so, and then too, back to the shields, it really, Brene unpacks how there's about 12 different ways that armored leadership shows up. And what does it look like to be daring leadership? And again, it shows up as behaviors like cynicism, criticism. There's just different ways that these shields can show up.
Absolutely.
And let us be our full selves and let us be as great as we are.
Yeah. Because that's, ultimately that's what I know that we all want. We want to be able to show up fully, to be seen, heard, and valued for the contributions that we have to make, for our brilliance, our talents, our expertise that we bring to the table, no matter where you sit in the org chart, whether you're at the top or at the bottom or somewhere in between. We all want to be recognized and appreciated for our genius in its many, many faceted ways, shapes, and forms. And, you touched on something, Tovi, that I think is really important for people to understand, is that, we're always learning. We're always unpacking the junk in our trunk. Right? It's what I do for a living. I help people unpack the junk in their trunk, and there's still more. We always, oh wait, there's another little package back there. I forgot about that, right? Oh, I tucked that one really deep in a corner. I forgot it was there, right? So as you continue to work on yourself, you're able to show up more fully, more completely, and all the right people and opportunities and circumstances will show up for you as you continue to level yourself up with your own learning each and every day. But it's a process, and it does take courage, right? And it does take vulnerability, being vulnerable with yourself. I laugh every time I hear that word, because in one of my very, very first coach training courses with Inner Work Solutions back in 2001, it was one of my very first courses. My friend and colleague John said to me, when you're vulnerable, you're much easier to approach. I was like, what? No, I'm not going to go there, right? And it's taken me so many years to really understand and embody what he was telling me. And I did get the message many more times from different people over the years. I'm like, okay, I got it. I think I got it. Right. But it is a process. Right. And so I'm so excited for you, Tovi, that you get to share this brilliant work from Brené Brown with the world. And I know that you're teaching it in a variety of different ways in different groups. So give us an idea of some of the other ways that you're getting to apply this work in the work that you do.
It is just such a through line in the work that I'm doing around equity and inclusion. All the race-based conversations and inclusion work that's happening. I'm working with a lot of leaders around their own white fragility, working with people of color in responding to white fragility, and we're really leading compassionate circles and compassionate talks around this work. So it's definitely played into that. I do a lot of trauma-informed work from the course that I helped to co-design at Mills, and presenting on that all over the nation right now around trauma-informed work, and particularly how it relates to our cultural responsiveness and how we have educational trauma as adults in the system that we're then kind of passing on that educational trauma to the students that we teach and the teachers that we work with. And so this whole courage, consciousness, and dare to lead concepts and the way that we're armoring up is what helps contribute to the trauma.
Yeah.
And so again, and then armoring up in ways that we cannot have race-based conversations of quality and compassion and true healing. So this work is just such a through line to so many facets of the types of offerings that I'm doing out in the world, and then seeing how people are also using it in their own organizations and in their own lives. So it's just been really, really insightful and fabulous to be able to help to bring Brené's work out to people who are not as familiar with her work at all, who otherwise would not be, and start to introduce it there as a layer. And there's a piece from her book I'd love to be able to read.
Yes.
It's really short, and it is specific to educators, but I think that it takes, it kind of goes out to everyone, really. And so, of course, I found it earlier. Now I can't find it because that's how things will work.
That's right. You'll find it in just a moment.
In just a moment. It's right there. I swear it was tagged, Michelle. Now
it's all good.
Totally got it. I'm gonna find it. Oh my gosh.
And boom, there it is.
There it is. And this is in the words of Brene in her introduction. As I often tell teachers, some of our most important leaders, we can't always ask our students to take off the armor at home or even on their way to school, because their emotional and physical safety may require self-protection. But what we can do, and what we are ethically called to do, is create a space in our schools and classrooms where all students can walk in and ask for that day or hour, take off the crushing weight of their armor, hang it on a rack, and open their heart to truly being seen. And that is what we are being called to do, not just as educators, but as leaders, as supervisors, as CEOs, as project directors, as people in the world, to create environments where people can truly be seen for who they are, for the gifts that they bring, for how valuable their contributions are, and how we have to disarmor ourselves so that others can disarmor themselves. And it's like that S that you want to add around safety. How do we provide that emotional, that psychological, and that physical safety for other people to get the work done, to do their work? And that links back to the quote that you love, which is my favorite too, that as leaders, we must either invest a reasonable amount of time attending to fears and feelings, or squander an unreasonable amount of time trying to manage ineffective and unproductive behavior. We'll never get anywhere if we focus on that part.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm so excited for all the good works that you're doing in the world, and I know the powerful impact that it's having and the ripple effects that it's having, certainly here in the Bay Area at Stanford and Mills College and the teams that you're working with, but all across the country too, and all the other places that you're sharing your brilliance and your talents with. I want to share one more quote from Brene. It's her favorite quote, and she shares it often. But I'll share it here because it truly speaks to who you are, Tovi. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man or woman who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. Theodore Roosevelt. So thank you for being a daring and courageous woman to lead the way you do. You move me and the good works.
Thank you, Michele.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I am just your reflection.
It's a mutual love society. You're making me cry. So please tell everyone how they can get in contact with you, how they can find out more about your upcoming workshops and the beautiful, brilliant work that you do in the world.
Well, thank you. I have an Instagram that's Goddess at Work. That's been my moniker for a long time. I got nicknamed that some years ago. And I have a website That is www.ticiess.com. So TCS.com. And it's also how you say my initials, TCS. And so you can get in touch with me through my website there. Love to have you follow me on Instagram. My Twitter is Integral Self Mastery. So I look forward to hearing from you, doing some exploration of possible work together. But I'm taking this out into the world in bigger ways, and I'm excited about it. And the Eventbrite links are up for trauma-informed trainings as well as the Dare to Lead work.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, we will have all of those links available to you all in the show notes on YouTube once we post this live on June 19th. And we're excited to see you shine even further out into the world, Tovi, with all the goodness that you're doing. So thank you very much for being here on the show with me today. It's been a delight and pleasure. And I look forward to seeing and hearing more about all the amazing things that you're doing. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, fabulous. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Know that next month in July, our show will air on July 19th, 9:30 a.m. Pacific, 12:30 Eastern, 5:30 UK time, and we'll have another amazing woman and guest for you to indulge in and to listen to. And in the meantime, feel free to reach out to me. You can always find me at nectarconsulting.com. We can have virtual coffee sometime if you're so inclined. So check it all out, and have an awesome month, and we'll see you soon. Be well.